Yes, that is a scene that Peter Morgan has made up, I suppose. There's no evidence that Nixon made a phone call to Frost of that sort of nature. But Peter, it is true that Nixon used to make late-night intoxicated phone calls. He was on a lot of medication, apparently, at the time, and so it wasn't that he had to drink a lot, it's just that drinking at all kind of sort of knocked him out a bit. And he used to have trouble sleeping, apparently, so he would make these late-night phone calls to various people on his staff, and then forget that he'd made them, and wouldn't be aware that he'd done it. And so there was a memo, apparently, that went round to the staff, or not a memo, they were told that if the president is to call you, you talk to him, and he will eventually fall asleep, and then once he does fall asleep, you just put the phone down and you don't talk about this to anybody. And I think when Peter found out about this, he thought it would be, it sort of made sense to him, something clicked for him in terms of wanting to write a scene where he could show, for two men who appear to be so different, Nixon is very envious of Frost's apparent ease with people, his ease with women, his charm with people, and his ease in social situations, which I suppose in some ways is symbolized by the shoes, that Nixon wishes that he could wear the same shoes as Frost, but doesn't feel that he could get away with it. So for two men who appear on the surface to be so different, Peter wanted to find a way to show what was similar about them, that in fact they both feel like they're outsiders, and that they're both sort of driven to try and become members of the club. But also, Peter was interested in the idea of someone who, at the very moment that they're told that they've succeeded, so in the scene preceding the telephone call scene where Nixon is playing piano, and Kevin Bacon's character says that Nixon is sitting on an 11-0 victory over Frost. In that moment of success, there is something about Nixon that just cannot abide the idea of winning. There is something self-destructive about it. So in that moment where you see Frank's face as Nixon sitting at the piano, dealing with the fact that he's won, you see that it doesn't sit well with him, and then something in him has to bring down his own defeat by making this phone call and inciting Frost into destroying him, handing him the sword with which to slay him, sort of thing, by inspiring him inciting him to do the work that he needs to do in order to bring him down. So it became that scene became something that, in a very economical way, I suppose, allowed Peter to explore a lot of stuff that he thought was going on for these characters at the time, even though there wasn't a phone call. He felt that it expressed a truth about the situation and what was going on for them psychologically and emotionally at that time.
We're not going to let that happen, either of us. We're going to show those bums. We're going to make them choke on our continued success, our continued headlines, our continued awards and power and glory. We are going to make those mothers choke! Am I right?
You are. Except only one of us can win.
No, it was always there was always a lot of humour in the piece. What was interesting was seeing how the humour changed from Britain to America. I mean, obviously in Britain, people were a lot more familiar with Frost as a character, whereas in America, of course, they weren't as aware of him. And even if people had heard of Frost or have seen him on his American show, he's certainly not the iconic figure that he is for the people of Britain, and a much more, I suppose, complicated figure for the British people, in so much as that when American audiences hear me doing Frost's voice, I remember people saying that the Americans hear sophistication and intelligence and class, whereas British people hearing me doing Frost's voice hear something very different. And Frost is a very contradictory figure for people in Britain, in that there's a kind of a mistrust of him in some ways, because he refuses to stay in one box and does lots of different things, and there's a kind of a mistrust of that, the sort of jack of all trades kind of thing. And that he was the first British TV star. He, in some ways, came to symbolize television, this glamorous interloper in people's living room that promised a new world and was very exciting because of that, but also was in your house and you didn't know whether to trust this thing. And so Frost became, through doing That Was the Week That Was, a hugely influential and powerful figure within British culture. And then, through the years has done all kinds of things, can do hard-hitting political interviews, but also through the keyhole and that kind of stuff. And so that complexity and those contradictions helped with the humour of the piece when we were in Britain. Now, all of that completely disappeared once we were in America, because there just wasn't that kind of relationship with him as a figure. In America, what became much more to the fore was the sort of the riffing around the character of Nixon, where people have a much more visceral relationship with Nixon, obviously, in America. And I think part of Peter's writing, a certain element of it depends on people's preconceptions of the characters that he's writing about. So sort of written into the piece itself is a kind of a sense of humor and based on what people already know about the characters or what they already beliefs they have about the characters. So if people don't have much knowledge of the character, then a lot of that humor disappears. So, like I say, in Britain there was a lot more humor coming out of the Frost situation, whereas in America a lot more with Nixon. So then when we came to do the film, Ron, I think, wanted to try and write into the piece itself a lot of to try and inform the audience who aren't as familiar with Frost a lot more about Frost than there was in the play. So there's a lot more information about Frost in the film and a lot more information about his struggle, seeing him with the sponsors and trying to raise the money and all that kind of stuff that wasn't in the play, I suppose, in order to try and build up a sense of who this man is for an audience who weren't aware of it.